Hello and welcome to Saunders on Security, brought to you by Corinium Global Intelligence, the podcast for the busy CISO, where we are talking about everything security related to the industry. And I'm really happy today to have with me John Sileo. And John is an international speaker based in the USA, and he has quite the decorated list of clients, including the Pentagon and Homeland Security. So John, very welcome to coming onto the podcast here, and I'm excited to hear from you. I'm doing a bit of a gushing thing here. Can you give us
Gush
a little bit
away.
about
Come
you?
on, gush away.
Give us a little bit about yourself. What got you into this industry? What's your space? What's your take? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, oh Ross, what got me into the industry is all the bad stuff that happens to people via cybercrime. So the short double story is I'm a two-time victim of cybercrime. The first was this garden variety mortgage copies of mortgage documents stolen out of my trash. On my curb at home, a group called the Cash Men, who they dress up like our trash men, our garbage men, and go around and pluck the bags off the curb, take them away in a truck, and filter through them in a warehouse. They sold my identity on the dark web. A woman bought it. Her name was Rosemary Serrano. She used it to buy a home in Boca Raton, Florida, a couple thousand miles away. Declared bankruptcy as me, committed crimes using my social security number, and so forth. So that was the light case. And then from there, while I was busy dealing with that, I didn't quite make the jump that, hey, this stuff affects businesses too. And this was some time ago. This was before there was any popular discussion of this. An agent of our economic crimes unit, part of our district attorney's office, showed up at my door to tell me that I was going to be charged with a crime. They expected I'd spend 10 years in jail. I, of course, thought it had to do with Rosemary Serrano, the woman who stole my identity the first time.
Yeah.
In this case, it was actually my best friend, my rock climbing partner, my business partner, Doug, who had embezzled from all of our software clients. We ran an application service provider accounting program, embezzled from them all, but he used my login credentials to do it, including all of the banking. So I faced a 2-year criminal trial. It was an awful thing. I lost the business, $2 million business. I lost 2 years of my life fighting the trial, and that's when I decided, and this was back in 2003 to 5 time range, that I had to do something about it. I educated myself, and I've spent the last 15 years doing that and speaking around the world. Never yet in South Africa, but I'm hoping that comes at some point. So there's how I got into it. Yeah, exactly. Let's hope we all get back to that in this next year.
Yeah, let's hope. I'll see how that goes. Great, John. Geez, that's crazy to have that stuff. You hear about that stuff happening, and I've had some of that garden variety dumpster diving too. But that rest of it that you've had, that's just astonishing. And I don't even want anyone going through what I went through, and just to hear about that is just crazy. I can understand why you got into security. I got into privacy because of my dumpster diving too. Right. So, John, today we're going to talk about something you mentioned, which is moving victory to the start in terms of chatting to CISOs and things like that. So, I mean, we want to get into some of the challenges that CISOs face and all that, but tell us a bit about this moving victory to the start and the space that you're in within security and all of that, and where you've been now that you're in it.
Yeah, so I take a pretty high level approach, meaning a management and leadership approach. I'm not super technical, enough to be dangerous and kind of talk the talk. But what I have discovered in working with, Pentagon, Homeland Security, Visa, big companies, and just as much smaller companies and mid-sized companies, is that the relationship between the CISO and IT, between security and management, is oftentimes there's not very good communication. There's not a great way to say, hey, here's why we need a budget. Here is why we need resources, man and woman power for this project. And essentially what I've come up with is a what I call a cyber stakes storyboard, or it's a threat narrative. So I've taken what I utilize as a speaker and as a writer, and that is story. Story is such a universal piece of knowledge that we all have. Most stories work on the same basic set of principles. So think about it. You've got a hero, right, with something at stake, something of high value at stake that exists in a setting of some sort. Then along comes an adversary of one type or another. They make an attack, and generally in both in the movies and in cybersecurity, there is a defeat. We suffer a defeat. I lost everything, and then I start paying attention. At that point, there is a guide that we seek out or that comes along. They have an action plan, and we achieve victory, right? That is the archetype of stories from the time of Homer through to now. So I wish that I could cite, Cry the Beloved Country or some of the other great South African, but they are such complex stories. It's not a great example. So let me use one that maybe you tell me if your listeners would have seen, which is like one of the Rocky movies, maybe Rocky 3. Is that familiar in your?
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be familiar. Yeah.
Okay, so in Rocky 3, if you think about it, you have a hero, Rocky Balboa, who has in Rocky 3 the heavyweight belt at stake, but he's living in a setting where he has grown soft. Right? He's had victory. He's gotten rich. He's not training anymore. Along comes an adversary, Clubber Lang, Mr. T, who attacks, puts him on the ropes, immediately intimidates him, and there's a defeat. That's the point at which Apollo Creed, his former enemy, becomes his guide. They hatch a plan together, which is Eye of the Tiger, that everybody remembers, and together they achieve victory. So that pattern happens in all of these breaches that we see if we go and look at them. A company goes through all of this, they get defeat, and then suddenly they have an IT-centric response immediately to this. Their action plan goes only to the IT people. And that's not what solves cybercrime. That's not what creates a strong defense. So if you reorganize the story and you take the victory or the victory and the defeat, and you put it at the start of the story. That's how a writer works. They think about, hey, what's the worst case scenario? What's the conflict? I'm going to put it up front, and what is our victory? Put it up front, and as well with the guide. So you're just kind of shifting Act 3 to Act 1, so to speak. The benefit of this is twofold. Number one, operationally, because people understand then, okay, who is the adversary? Is it Russia in this case? Is it, small-time hackers sitting in their basement with Cheetos, which actually I don't think exists, but the movies make us think it does.
I need to get a hoodie still, because that's apparently the look that I need to get.
Exactly. And so operationally, it helps companies and organizations think through this in a very systematic way so that they're not missing something like, hey, what is our current setting? Let's do an analysis of where we are and what the gaps are. That often doesn't happen. Or, hey, we're in COVID. The setting has totally changed. We're now massively distributed computing. The setting is very different. So it gives a languaging, and it gives a common framework for everybody to work together. And where we really see that help is when the security people are talking to the business people who fund this and manage it and lead it, and that utilizing those stories in a case study is a really effective way to get the message across in a compelling way.
Yeah. No, that storytelling. People will remember the story as well. I think so. It's much more than just data getting thrown at them. And it's interesting, you talk about getting that communication going between IT and business, and you're seeing certain companies bring that in now as well, with roles like the BISO roles, the Business Information Security Officer, and things like that, bringing it in. So it's really, really interesting. We're going to be chatting about that in one of the future episodes of the podcast, is the BISO roles and things there. But John, you mentioned there the cyber storyboard. What exactly is the cyber storyboard that you bring up?
The storyboard is really what I've just talked through in kind of a 9 parts of the story. Now, for the average story, you actually collapse it into 6. So I wouldn't try and relate this, from from a security person to an executive in 9 steps. It's too much to remember. Excuse me. 6 steps is much easier. So you kind of collapse the adversary, the attack, and the defeat down into the conflict, and people understand that in terms of the story. So really what it is it goes through and it takes a look at each of those components. Let's just take one of them, for example, or let's take 2, the first 2, hero and stakes. So the hero generally is almost completely ignored in terms of who is it that we want to win in this. A lot of times the security department is thinking, thinking in a different way than the business is thinking. The business is thinking in terms of competitive advantage. They're thinking in terms of more than just loss prevention, right? In security, we think of, hey, let's stop the losses of the data and of the money and so forth. Yeah. The business people are thinking, how do we deal with business continuity and resilience? So that the terminology is different. So defining the hero is really important. And what that may mean is when a security professional is going to the board meeting, and especially now post-COVID or mid-COVID, we're being invited to the board meetings more because we've become so important. Making sure you understand, okay, who am I going to paint as the hero here? Is it the bottom line? Is it us as a security team, which doesn't work at all? So that's breaking down these components. The second one that I think is totally critical and often missed is we kind of have this, I referred to it before, an IT-centric. So the attack and the defeat happens, right, in a traditional breach, let's say Marriott. And then all the executives wake up and their response is IT-centric. Give it to the IT team. It's all about IT. This has nothing to do with company culture or education or training or any of that. And if you replace that with thinking through it in terms of the stakes, what does this business do? What does it provide? So a power company, ultimately what is it doing? They're powering people's homes. That's what's at stake. It's not about any one piece of data. And that shift from IT-centric, throw it all to the IT people, to business-centric or activity-based is a real jump for a lot of organizations.
Yeah. I think you're bringing in sort of more that systems thinking, that holistic thinking, where you're taking that up high view down what's happening across the business. But you are so right. We see it all the time where something happens and it just goes straight to the IT team or straight to the InfoSec team. And that's where the problem must be resolved. Resolve it over there. And it's an entire business thing. But you say such a great thing there with, you've got to have the language between business, between tech, between IT, between security, because there are different languages that people are speaking there, not just referring to Python and Java and things like that. It's literally the business communication is different in those teams.
It is different, yeah.
Yeah. How do you see, do you see this in practice when you're working in this, how the communication changes, things like that? How have you seen it change?
One of the big things that I'm starting to see is something you will have recognized and the people listening to this will have recognized some time ago, which is security. Traditionally, I think of security as defense. I know that's not always true, but with defend forward and so forth, it's becoming more offensive. But I think of security as defense, and traditionally, to take a a rugby metaphor, security has reported, the defense has reported to the offensive coordinator, right? It has reported to the CIO or the CTO and been underneath that. And those are two, to me, two not opposing jobs, but jobs with different ends. And having security report to the person who's in charge of the offense is very different. Well, with COVID and companies rethinking their security and giving security a seat at the table, whether it's a boardroom table, an executive meeting, or just, God forbid, coming and talking to us, that has given us a chance to convince them, to let them know, hey, we are our own independent. We should report directly to the CEO or COO, not as part of information, because we have interesting and sometimes contrary stuff to say to the CIO. So I see this storyboard being used in terms of, let's develop a different narrative, whether it's a threat narrative or how we bridge the business and the security aspects of it. Let's utilize this narrative in the boardroom to say, hey, our power structure should be different. That's one way that I've seen it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's also a fascinating thing, and it's something that I think with the likes of the GDPR in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation, where I'm going to divert into the privacy space a bit here, but it speaks to, I think, what you're talking to there is there's the concept of the data protection officer, but what the GDPR does is it gives that data protection officer both protection and autonomy in the business, because often, like you're mentioning, where you have these security sides of things, bringing that up in certain circumstances can be risky. And there are actually clauses and provisions in GDPR that says, you know what, if your data protection officer brings up that there is this massive hornet's nest that's about to get stirred up, you can't fire them for bringing it up because you don't like the news. They need to be able to operate independently. They need to be able to report independently, and they need to be able to report to the right level. So that's very interesting that you brought that up, and it's nice hearing that from sort of the cybersecurity space and not from the legalese space that I play in most frequently.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, that's another thing, is compliance is like, I know compliance drives a lot of these programs, but by itself, it's hollow. I mean, it doesn't do it. Culture, who was it? Peter Drucker that said, God, what was the phrase that he said? Culture eats
strategy for breakfast, I think.
Strategy for breakfast, yeah. And that's the part that I have seen so much is, and I have to say, less so in the large organizations, more so in smaller ones, that they're starting to build a culture of security and build it in and give the voice to, like you just said, that, hey, we have to know these things are going on, or the hornet's nest just continues to grow.
Yeah, and the culture side of it is so important, and I think people downplay the culture side a lot. Like you said, with compliance and all of that, and compliance can be a checklist, and the checklist is never effective. But I see it in a lot of companies that I work with, where there's a culture of, say, the executive not taking security seriously, and maybe this speaks as well to that IT department problem thing. But the executive doesn't take it seriously. Therefore, none of the staff take it seriously either, because the folks at the top don't. There's no communication. It falls apart a lot. And you get that sort of normalization of deviance, where you do one thing wrong today, it's wrong today, it's frowned upon tomorrow, and then it's the business norm the day after that.
Russ, I can't tell you how much we understand the normalization of deviance here in the United States for the last 4 years. And people following stuff that has nothing to do with reality. So yes, we see that all the time in cybersecurity as well.
Yeah. So when you've implemented these storyboards, and when you talk about bringing the story into organizations, we've spoken a bit of the results that you've seen and things like that. what kind of, I don't know how to word this, what kind of practical turnaround do you see in teams when they start thinking this way? Perhaps taking it from the executive side, taking it from also from the ground up side, from the coalface, where you've got folks perhaps say in a call center or something. How do you see this playing out at that broad spectrum there?
Yeah, so it really is an inverted pyramid that I see. And so what companies are doing, at least now realize they're selecting me and this methodology, so they're already bought in to some degree, but they're starting at the bottom of the triangle with the individual. Let's educate the individual on their own identity, their own privacy and security. Let's get them to buy in at an ownership level. And that's where culture starts, is with individuals. As, like you say, from the top down, you've got executives that are talking about this at every hands-on deck meeting, at annual conferences, in articles, in emails, and it's moving. And what I see, and mostly I see it because, in this space that I've got behind me, I run retreats where I'm actually doing executive presence training for CISOs, however you pronounce it, in your world. And it's because they want to work more in the business world. And by the way, they're being asked to be accountable in the business world. It's not just that they want to be there. It's now that the COO is saying, or the CFO, we need you, but you need to be able to present in front of a board quarterly and do a good job of it. And that the net effect of that is, I've seen a bunch of things. Budgets being not necessarily going up, especially because of COVID, but being reallocated in terms of more education, more cultural development. I've seen a lot of paring down of security software packages, and that may mean accelerating movement to the cloud for managed security. It may mean, hey, we've got too many complex items running and we don't think they're worth the money. But now these are related in business terms, like, you know what? We don't need all of these packages. We need a single dashboard that people actually monitor rather than letting the alerts go astray, and do something about it. And as they get more comfortable with that communication in business terms, this is what's costing us and it's not doing the job. It has a huge effect on that relationship between the business side and the security side.
Yeah. I must say, COVID has turned everything upside down. I'm dealing with a couple of clients now that have completely gotten rid of physical offices. And that's brought in its own set of challenges as well, because now they've got all this server hardware that was sitting in a server room on premises, and now it's being shifted in the cloud, and there's the security risks of, lift and shift. It's a different world now that you're in the cloud, at different access levels, physical access is different. So yeah, it's very much a topsy-turvy thing, and getting that invitation and getting it to be a more business thing is I'm definitely seeing that. I also keep an eye on various job boards and things like that, and you see the role descriptions changing to more,
Really?
like you say, presenting to the boards, to being able to present in front of, on the stage and things like that. And I think trust and cybersecurity is becoming a marketing tool as well now, where your CISO is going to conferences and selling the business services of the company because of trust.
I couldn't agree more. And man, have we been waiting for that to happen. That, and there are a couple of companies that have really glommed onto that. Apple is one. They security and privacy and lifestyle are all as important to them as collecting customer data. Now, they want to collect it for internal sales for other Apple products, but in terms of where they share and house that data and retain it, is different. And yes, from a marketing perspective, especially, as we have seen this latest Russian hack on SolarWinds, it makes a huge difference that you now have that as part of your core offering, not an also ran, but hey, security is built in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I must say I'm so fond of what Apple is doing around this stuff. And I had a little proud moment. I'm very much in the Apple ecosystem, but seeing today, like Apple mentioned in a security research bulletin, I was like, oh, what's gone wrong now? Go look, and it's actually the researcher saying, well, this is a really cool feature that they've introduced that they didn't tell anyone about, and it's the sandbox for iMessage and its security and all that. It's quite nice reading that it's a security feature that hasn't been exploited yet that's now suddenly being discovered, which is awesome. It gives me more faith in the company, and I tell you what, I will stay with Apple because of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they're doing that with the privacy stuff, which I think actually from a consumer perspective, consumers care more about privacy and what's Facebook doing with my data. And when Apple steps up and Tim Cook gives a speech that says, hey, this is not okay. If the government's not going to regulate it, then we are going to give you a choice of how much is shared through Facebook. That to me is a massive step in the right direction.
Yeah. I think that the biggest favor done to the privacy scene lately has been WhatsApp and the new terms and conditions, because I think even though people are perhaps overreacting to these terms and conditions because it's been there for a long time, it's suddenly this massive awareness that, oh, we should take our privacy seriously. And it's just, I'm loving seeing the snowball from it, to be honest.
Isn't it funny what triggers it? Like, who would have thought that WhatsApp publishing something that they've been doing, and by the way, if you're on Facebook has been doing since the beginning of the company, but that triggered it. People are jumping to Signal and other encrypted type products.
Yeah. No, it's been a crazy boon. I mean, we've been so busy in privacy now since WhatsApp. It's been the craziest thing because it's suddenly on the table again.
So when you say you've been busy, what is it that you've been asked to do? What are they asking for, the organizations?
A lot of really like, are we secure anymore? But it's not actually referring to WhatsApp. It's referring to other products that are in their stables because they've started reading the privacy policies. And you suddenly get, well, this privacy policy says that my information is going to be shared. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. It's like, oh, well, you signed this. But now they're reading it. And it's becoming interesting because we're now consulting in the space and saying, look, well, these services are good, these ones are bad. And it's spilling over into the legislative side because now people are paying attention, where is my data stored? And because with WhatsApp as well, Europe got different terms than the rest of the world did. And suddenly people are asking why, and no, it's privacy. So it's been a fantastic snowball over 6 weeks. It's like what's developed in 6 weeks and in the last year because of COVID as well, is more than we've seen develop in ages, I think, or it's unprecedented, I think.
It's time that we hit critical mass on some of this stuff and people and businesses started paying attention. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, that's great. John, we're coming up to the wrap up here, and I want to thank you for joining us and bringing this up. It's such a great, refreshing way of thinking about things, just hearing the storytelling and all of that. And, I'm in the speaking space as well, and I've never thought of relating storytelling through to the cybersecurity side. So it's such a cool thing that's going on in my head right now, knowing the two sides of it. But as we wrap up, one question that I generally ask every one of my guests in here is, if you had one quick win or no-brainer that a CISO could implement in a company, what would that be? What would you advise a CISO to put in as their quick victory?
Wow. How to narrow that one down. The quick victory would be, gosh, that is a great question. Give me a second to think about it because I want to give something substantive. I think for me, it's about relationships. And I don't know how to quantify that, but if there were one thing that if I were doing as a CISO or a security professional, it would be the relationship that I have with the business side executives. I would literally go out for coffee, sit them down, and let them know in business terms my side of the equation. Now, I know that kind of flies in the face of all of the technical things that we can do, but because I spend my time seeing things being lost between the two parties, it gets lost between here and here, technical and business. That relationship, to me, a relationship between the security people and the IT people, as you know, so many business people think those are the same things.
Yes.
That relationship, that would be the first thing I would do with every influential member of the executive team.
I think that's fantastic. You know, the interesting thing with that question is I have not had the same answer from any one guest, which is great. And I love the people side of that. That's fantastic.
Offline, I'd love to hear what your other answers are, because it's such an intriguing
Great.
question.
Great. I think at the end of the season, we're probably going to combine all those answers that we've received into an article or something to release. It's been a fantastic exercise to do, I must say. So, John, I want to say a huge thank you for being on the podcast. If people want to get hold of you, how do they go about doing so?
You know, easiest way is either through the website, which is just my last name, sileo.com. Of course, I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and if you Google me, not sure how it is from South Africa, but generally, if you put in John Sileo and cyber or anything, you'll find all kinds of ways to get in touch with me.
Fantastic. John, thanks again for being on with us today. And thank you to all our listeners. We will catch you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.